a big part of today, and what I've personally been learning, is just who to connect out to, who to start meeting and learning from. So we hope from today you're going to have a massive contact list of what to do next and where we can go. So thank you all so much. I'm going to keep welcoming people in here for the next little bit, but I'm going to pass things off to Christy Coltman, is our president of Advocates Vancouver Island, and we're really honored that we've come together as all BC chapters, obviously through Advocates, the Financial Planning Association of Canada. We have multiple chapters all over the country, and this is a unique opportunity when we can actually join forces and have multiple regions all together. That's kind of the good thing of technology and the not so good thing. So Christy will take things from here for our first welcoming part of our day, and she's joined with Bruce Underwood as well. And Christy, I will pass it over to you guys. Bruce, I'll unmute you here too. So.
Thanks, Philip. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you are looking forward to today as much as I am. I want to start by respectfully acknowledging the ancestral sacred ground of the Wasanich people, on whose land I am a guest in my life, work, and play. So this day has come about through a series of conversations and events that have happened over the last couple of years. And as often happens, conversations and events, while all happening separately, came together with the creation of this one idea, today's meeting. The trigger that brought us this meeting was the recognition of the upcoming federal statutory holiday, Truth and Reconciliation Day, on September 30th. The 4 BC Advocates chapters wanted to bring to our members the importance of this day. The day itself has been created to recognize and commemorate the legacy of the residential schools. The federal government has stated that this may present itself as a day of quiet reflection or participation in a community event. Since this national holiday has given us the opportunity to reflect and learn about Indigenous people, we wanted to give you the opportunity to hear from Indigenous people, learn about the culture of Indigenous people, and learn how, as financial advisors, we can best support our Indigenous community members. Our hope for today is that we will all walk away with more understanding, empathy, and knowledge. We are financial advisors, and we proudly belong to our professional association, Advocates. And I believe that belonging to Advocates means supporting and connecting with community. And today, we're going to do that with our Indigenous community. So I am going to kick things off with a conversation with my good friend and client, Bruce Underwood. I've known Bruce for over 7 years. Bruce is the executive director of Coast Salish Employment and Training Society, which is a funding, training, delivery, and coordination agency supporting Aboriginal individuals and communities. Bruce is a current council member of Sail Band and past chief of the Pockwitchin Band. Both Bruce's great-grandfather and great-uncle Don were also chiefs. Bruce is married and has 3 children. Bruce believes that families are what is most important. He says, when families are strong, the community is strong. When community is strong, it can achieve great things. So welcome, Bruce, and thank you for joining us today. I know you're there somewhere.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much again for joining us today. So Bruce, I wanted to start by addressing this national holiday that's been created by the federal government. As a First Nations person, what does the phrase truth and reconciliation mean to you?
Utsia Tala, Utsia Thama, Haidzep, Tanana Okacha, Tent Yais, Tin the Squale, Tamakala, Tin the Swallow, and Utsia Tala, Haidzep. Thama. Thanking you, Christy, for trusting me to be part of a meeting today. And knowing every time we come together, and in our culture, every time we do something, it's very sacred. And we acknowledge the work that we do, especially if we step out of our comfort zones, that we can make a difference somewhere, somehow. We can plant a seed and have something for those that we might be meeting with, something to think about and to nourish themselves with. And that's what they get to swallow for that particular part of the day. And they get to absorb that piece. But I always think of it every time we step out of our comfort zone and we do something. I remind my kids, it's like that sports channel highlight, you do a highlight of the month and you watch it over the course of the year, and you watch it in December and you get to see the sports highlights for the year. And I think when we do things like this is almost like the highlight, like the TSN turning point, if we can use that as a sports analogy. But I think there's things that we do in our lives that we don't think make a big difference, but meetings like this does. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and to speak to the word truth and reconciliation. I grapple with that word. I know our nation does. And sometimes we don't know what it means, because if you ask 5 people, you're going to get 5 different definitions of what truth and reconciliation means. And do people stop to listen to the First Nations around what they're looking for and what their needs are? Nobody's knocked on my door to ask me as a First Nations person what that is and what my leadership need to say on my behalf. That hasn't really happened. So when I think of the word truth and reconciliation, I think of the word truth. And truth comes with trust. Yeah. And a lot of the times right now, there is no trust in our communities. There's no trust for government. An example is we have treaties in our communities, in our villages, in our nations. And these are pre-confederated treaties, and they're with the Crown. And some of them are with the federal government of Canada, and the province is stepping in with their jurisdiction or their legislation. And so, and I'm not trying to hurt feelings on this call, but to be very truthful, when BC Ferries, for example, I look back at some of the stories I've heard and my cautions around traveling, leaving the reserve, this village. Be careful out there. There's a lot of people that don't like you. And I'm thinking they don't even know me not to like me. So I'm really nervous when I hear my grandparents and my parents weren't allowed to ride on the BC Ferries upstairs. They have to stay down on the car deck. I'm hearing that we weren't allowed to go to the restaurants. And that was a concern. And I think of that. And when I'm hearing those kinds of things around not being able to sit in a restaurant, and we have to go in the back and get our food if we were rich enough to order something. So I think.
Go ahead, Bruce. Sorry.
It's all good. And I think when we start to look at some of the things that are happening, so that's kind of our family experience. You got to remember, not even 100 years ago, we still lived in longhouses, and we lived in multi-families. And my grandparents would have their 7 children, and those 7 children would have their spouses and their children all living in a home. That's how my grandparents were raised. And when they were born, they were still doing that. So it's not even 2 generations ago that was our dwelling. Mm-hmm. And it's weird for us to have running water. It was weird for them, not for me. I'm not that old, I guess. But I think those things are things that my grandparents grew up with, and they had to adjust over their lifetime. But I'm saying, when I'm trying to stay focused to the truth and reconciliation, and I used the word trust. In 1969, there was a white paper policy, and that was to take the Indian out of the Indian. There's a document that says that. And I know when BC did the rejection of governmental funds in 1975, that created a wave. And that wave is still there because there's no trust, because people are still taking the land and they're turning it into provincial parks. They're turning it into federal parks, CRD. We still go to the table in good faith and create these accord documents with the federal government, the provincial government. All the while in the back of our minds, there was things with the residential schools, the 60s scoop. The Ministry of Children and Family, believe it or not, still have the same amount of children in care today as they did when the residential school era was alive. So the heartbeat of our community isn't where it needs to be, that calmness. We're still walking on eggshells. And I was told when I leave the reserve, my grandparents would leave the reserve, they were told to be careful what they were doing, and they had to sign a piece of paper to leave this village. And they were given a tag to wear. Well, still today, that tag's something we acknowledge, and we acknowledge it as a status card. So I'm thinking, I get a little bit nervous when people ask me about what are the truths or what's truth and reconciliation. I ask, what is the federal and provincial government's call to action? What's the United Nations Declaration? And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I guess truth and reconciliation means, to me, be careful, be on guard, be on your defenses, and rally together, because trust isn't there for people. They haven't stepped into our community out of their comfort zone to see how we live and the struggles we have. And I'm not saying people don't have struggles, their non-First Nations relatives don't have struggles. We all do. But some of them are imposed. And I think that's the discussion that needs to be had.
I think you answered just about 5 of my questions, actually.
Oh. Sorry.
You know, I think what's so important about this day is what I said in the beginning, that it's about understanding and knowledge and empathy. And your discussion there allows us to peek into your world a little bit, which I think is most important. And what you were saying there. If I can just ask you about the land or territorial acknowledgements. Now, I did come knocking on your door with regards to that. If you remember, 6 or 7 months ago, I asked Bruce if he would help me put together a land acknowledgement, because I wanted it to mean something. I wanted it to, I wanted to do it right. And so he was actually the one that helped me create what I said at the beginning of this meeting. And when I first heard land acknowledgements, that was, of course, at my children's school assemblies. And, I like them. I think that they show respect to Indigenous people. And it reminds me, I have to be reminded that this was originally Indigenous land. But as a First Nations person, what do the land acknowledgements mean to you?
There's times where I feel like it's sincere, and there's times that I feel like it's not sincere. Mm-hmm. And some of our, I think it's just like anybody else. You get 10 people in the room, there'll be 7 people that are sincere about it, and there'll be maybe one or two of them might be going, well, wait a minute, I need to learn more about what this actually means.
Yeah.
And they're going to express more of an interest than one of the people way on the other side of the room. It doesn't really, I'll do it if I have to. So people can see who's phony around these kinds of things. So, and I think when we do this in our community, we acknowledge the fact that it's not so much just an acknowledgement. I think for me, it's around acknowledging our birthright as a people. And when we talk about the land, we talk about our siblings. And when we talk about the siblings, we talk about the air, the water, the elements. And when we do that, we refer to the whales, the salmon, as saltwater people. But we also acknowledge those that fly. So they become part of who we are. And in our culture and in our language, it's saying the ancestral ways, they lived off that. And that was in their DNA, which means it's in my blood. Without their ability to understand the resources on the land and to exist in that time to get us to where we are today. So that land acknowledgement basically is acknowledging our ancestral ways, the people, and their livelihood to allow the people to be in existence of where we are today and to allow us to be the people we need to be in this very moment.
If we switch over to, most of us on this call are financial advisors. Can you tell me what's been your investing experience over your lifetime?
Probably not good. I'm one of those people. I need to learn to understand money, to learn to appreciate it. And when I was raised by my grandparents, and they didn't really trust banks, but they lived through a time where they didn't have money. They were using different lamps for their lighting. They had wood stoves and they cooked off those things. But I think when they would put money away and just hide it. Well, guess what? Guess what I learned to do? I learned to take my paycheck, when I started working, and I would hide it. I would put it in a sock. I would put it in some place where I felt it was safe. And that's how I started learning to save. But I also learned too, in our culture, the more I can share with people, the richer I am as an individual. So especially at times of loss, and we can have biggest political differences, biggest family rivalries. But in a moment of loss, we put aside our differences for 10 days and allow the family to grieve. And guess what? My job is empty my pocket and help that family that's struggling. And that shows a sign of richness. It's not about the wealth in my fist that I'm able to hand over, but the richness that I carry as an individual. So I think when you ask me about wealth, to me, it's about our culture. It's about in our language. When we start to invest, we need to invest internally. And but I do get frustrated when I start to talk about money, especially to banks, if I can be open with you. I feel like if I'm a First Nations person living on reserve with a home that I've worked hard to maintain, just like anybody else does, I'm not taking that away from anybody. I could have the same square footage of a home as across the ditch to what they call municipality land. And there's no word in our language, by the way, for municipality land. So it's hard for us to define that. But if I had a home here, my house and my neighbor's house, and it's what they call off reserve municipal, this person can go to the bank and get a remortgage. I can't do anything with my house. My house isn't worth anything because I live on reserve, and yet I feel like I maintain my home just as like anybody else does. So that kind of can be frustrating when you want to try to talk about investments. And we need to teach our children a little bit younger, for those that are ready for it, and need to almost get our next generation ready before they hit the age of 19 and 25, being a critical year for us, I guess, as a timing. but I spend a lot of my time and energy trying to support my children get visa, understand the payments of vehicles, their saving account, their retirement account, and their home account. So I needed to try to balance. It's a tough thing to balance our cultural world and the money world. And we refer to this one as the Coca-Cola world, just so I can relate to them, right? So, but you can't sway too far this way, but you can't sway too far this way. So we have to have that balance. And a lot of our people tend to stay over here because they don't trust this side. And for those that go too far this way, they're not recognized in our culture. So it's a fine line. That path is very narrow. So you got to try to find a way to understand both of those. But I think I invest, Christy, because I trust people like you. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. So I need to find somebody that I trust. And people need to have that ability to trust somebody to hand over money to you. So I think the word trust and investment and just your ability to communicate, and more so to listen to my needs, and you were able to adapt or to articulate what you were hearing onto a piece of paper and help me invest differently than maybe I would have thought of. So I hope I'm answering that question around investing.
You are. Amazingly, we have hardly touched the surface, I feel like, but we only have a minute or two more. I did want to ask you one sort of looking forward question, just a general question, and that is, how do you feel about Indigenous people's future in this province and in Canada?
Well, I believe we're preparing ourselves as nations. Ceremonies are still alive today. We still practice our culture. We still have our language. And I think what we need to do, and I talk about that balance, is to really reinsure ourselves. And we're turning to our community leaders and our elders and our family leaders. We know something happened. Something happened with residential school. We understand the 60s scoop and the effects that it might have had. We've had, and it's sad to say, but my mom, all my uncles and aunties went to residential school. One of my uncles didn't come home from residential school, and he's one of the ones they found on the land that's unmarked. My sister was taking in the 60s scoop. I met her when I was 21 years old. She still lives in Chicago today. So when we have our community and family meetings, we talk about the resilience of the elders before them and how my grandparents were able to survive with the fact that their children were taken away without their knowledge. Their passion was to keep the culture alive. So when we all come home, we had something to lean on, like a crutch. Well, guess what? I feel like we're all starting to get stronger by understanding the culture that might have been tried to be taken away from us. So knowing that they did that with all their might, everything they had to survive that piece of it, that's where we're getting the energy as younger people. And my responsibility now as somebody that's a daddy to instill that responsibility onto my children. So I feel there's an opportunity for us as communities to encourage our children. And I think my grandchildren are going to have a better place than I did around because people are openly talking about racism and discrimination, where before it was hidden. And there was just times you had to fight and you don't know why you're fighting and why people didn't like you. So I think there's an opportunity coming for our children as long as they understand the computer systems and meetings like this. This is really foreign to, imagine trying to put our grandparents on these kind of calls. Eh? What is that? How'd they get in there? But anyway, I just want to say thank you for considering me today to be a part of this meeting.
Well, thank you so much. I am so happy that you have still your culture and your language. And it's so funny because I've said this to Bruce a couple times. We'll be sitting in a meeting, and a couple this past summer we've had on my back deck, and we'll be talking, and all of a sudden he'll look over and and I think I've lost him, but I haven't lost him. He's looking at the big cedar tree in my yard and how that relates and to his culture. And to me, and I've said this to him before, but I just have this sense of calmness when I'm around him. And I believe it is because of your connection to the earth. So, I think there is great opportunity for Indigenous people going forward. Yes, there's going to be struggles, as we all have, but I do really want to thank you for taking the time to join us and have this conversation with me. What I think you discussed today, it's only going to create more conversation, and that's only a good thing. So again, thank you so much, and you take care.
Bruce, thank you so much. We do have one quick question here that I think would be wonderful to address, and there's comments coming in of how much you've taught us today, Bruce, and people really appreciating the time that you've taken with us. So that last note there, that you are feeling hopeful for future generations, is just wonderful to hear, and I hope we can be part of that as we move forward here together. So one question is, Bruce, can you address the importance of Indigenous language being considered one of Canada's official languages, and what we can do to support and uphold inclusion of Indigenous peoples and communities?
I think just giving us time, giving see, we have ceremonies when our children are born, when they hit the age of 1. There's another ceremony. There's another ceremony when a child turns the age of 13, or when they start to mature, when their voice changes, for example, as a male. And 4 years after that, there's another ceremony. I think people need to allow us to have those ceremonies and to allow us to be who we need to be. And if time comes, I think the languages in our culture will exist and it'll start to show itself. But I think the curriculum inside the school programs is not there. There is no curriculum around the truth and reconciliation. There is no curriculum that allows the local people to talk about what's in the social studies program. And the locally developed programs that are in our schools aren't up to par as well. And I know the enhancement agreement with the provinces and the local education agreement with the First Nations communities are there, but they seem more like a funding agreement than they do about how do we create the curriculum that provides services. So I think we need to go back into our own community to allow some of those things to show itself. Because when we start to reach out, the flavor changes when we reach out too far, and more opinions get put into it. And they said, no, well, you got to meet this standard and that standard. The language is in here. It's alive. And I think we need to go back to that place and let it open ourselves up a bit and let the children absorb it like a sponge. So I think time, allowing our communities time to do that would be for me. I hope I'm answering that question for you.
No, that's wonderful, Bruce. And we get so busy, we move forward, we make investment capital decisions ruthlessly for often the wrong reasons, and we need to get back to it. And we're starting to see it go in the other direction, which is what the Indigenous communities for First Nations have been doing for hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and we're now just starting to learn from you. So thank you for the time, for sharing, and I look forward to many more conversations. Just the first one of many, I hope, Bruce. So thank you, and thank you so much, Christy, for working through that and inviting Bruce today. So thank you, guys. Bruce, do stay on. I don't know if you can see the comments, but I hope you can read some of those.
Just one of the things. Sorry, no, I haven't. I'm working from my phone, so I just see. Yeah. But I wanted to say, in our culture, and I know I'm running over time here, but one of the things, if you see this in our communities, it's Iatala, it's Iathama, or Haichka. In our culture, it says, you know, when you write a letter and you say sincerely yours, respectfully yours, thank you, and you sign your name.
Yeah.
Well, this means to us in our language, if I'm standing in the longhouse that's over 60 feet long, and I'm standing talking to Christy over here in the corner, or to you folks, and I lift up my hands, the elders on the far end, they might not hear what I'm saying, but they're saying, you know what? Those people that he's acknowledging must have done something really big. He's lifting up his hands and is putting his words to action. So when I lift up my hands today, you know, I say thank you and listen to the interpretation of that, because Salish is my hand. And people started to call us the Salish people. We're not the hand people, but we're referred to that as Salish people. But I just want to lift up my hands and say thank you, and to put my words to action. And thank you for, you could be talking about a lot of different things today. You could be talking about different investments and how to make money and how do you make money work. And those are things we need to learn about. And when I started that corporation, when I was the chief for the community, I said our investment needs to think about three things, and three things only: money, money, and more money. So, but the thing is, when you ask somebody to run for council and just a normal band member, one day I get elected in as chief, people seem to think that I need to have all this smarts. Well, I'm just a band member the day before. How am I going to load my head with all these smarts? Well, it's surrounding myself with people like Christy that understands money. Because if I'm a paycheck to paycheck kind of guy and I don't know how to invest, how are you going to give me millions of dollars to run a band?
Yeah.
So anyway, I just want to say thank you, and thanks again, and I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Everyone is saying hands up. So, Bruce, thank you so much. I wish you could read the comments, but you've given us a lot today. And thank you for slowing us down and allowing to be part of this conversation. Look forward to seeing you soon, Bruce. All the best.